short. So I am excited to introduce our speaker this morning for many reasons. I'm going to try and keep this short. I could talk about him all day, as he probably knows. So let me do both a professional introduction and then a bit of a personal introduction. So there's a reason we invited him. Greg Simon is the president of the Biden Cancer Initiative, which you may know in a form before this. Under the Obama administration, I don't know if you remember when they announced the cancer moonshot. This audacious, bold goal to cure cancer in 10 years. How many people's lives in some way in this room have been touched by cancer? Wow. Easily 75% of this room, hand just went up. The comparison there is this. You all in this room are trying to cure a bold, audacious goal as well, and that is curing intergenerational poverty. As difficult in some ways. The other thing that ties you to this next speaker is that the heart of what he's trying to do is to cultivate information sharing so they can cure it faster. He's going to talk about that work. The third reason you're connected to this speaker is that in many ways, and his bio is on the event app, he's been a champion of social progress in this country for his entire career. A warrior. He served under the Clinton administration as Al Gore's domestic policy advisor. He was under the Obama administration. He's started a number of nonprofits in the healthcare industry, as well as been an executive in the for-profit healthcare industry. But everything he has done has been about making this country better. Now, on the personal side, I've known Greg a long time. And so I've always sort of admired him in his career, the level in which he operates, his smarts, his humbleness about it. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about when I knew Greg would be speaking at this event. And it was about 14 years ago. I know it's hard to believe, right? It was at my wedding. When I got married, you know, the night of, after the ceremony, you know, my dad spoke, my father-in-law spoke, there was a mic set up, there was a little agenda, you know, a run of show. So they spoke, the two dads, and that was it for the agenda. And then I made a speech. And next thing I know, Greg Simon gets up. And I'm sitting there at the table, and I thought, Greg's not on the agenda. And guess what his opening line was? My wife's name's Kristen. He said, his opening line was, Kristen and I are partners. And I thought, that would have been good to know earlier. And I thought, that guy is going to make a speech for me one day. And almost numerous family events since, Greg has gone up and made a speech. It's been great. And then when I started thinking, like, maybe I'm thinking about Greg too much. You remember in the elections when George W. Bush took on Al Gore? It's the whole hanging Chad election. You remember that? So that night of the election, I went to bed. I didn't go to bed. I was watching, waiting for the results to come in. And I was on my couch, and I fell asleep. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up. And CNN was still on. I had fallen asleep with the TV on. And I kind of woke up all groggy. And I looked on the TV, and there was Greg talking about, because he was Al Gore's chief advisor, what was going on. And I kind of looked at the TV, and I thought, am I dreaming? Is that Greg? I never have told anybody that story because I was so embarrassed to tell people I may have been dreaming about Greg Simon. But this guy is a warrior for making this country better. I'm so thankful he's here. He's got a tough schedule to book for sure. Please welcome Greg Simon.
Well, as they say, before I talk, I want to say a few things. First, he did marry my business partner. I met her first. And I'm amazed at this room. I grew up in a little town in Arkansas. We have a phrase actually, for when I walk from like here to the back of the room. Where I grew up, that's called going across town. This is impressive. There were two. I'm kind of a little dreading this speech, okay? First, I seem to make a habit of giving talks to people who know more about the subject than I do. But as my wife has said, what's new about that? Secondly, or when I asked Ranj, how was yesterday? He said, oh, it was the best ever. It couldn't be topped. It was phenomenal. It's all people will remember from the whole conference. And I thought, what am I? This is Greek for what am I, chopped liver? And then the other thing was Rand said, listen, I know this is really hard for you to do. It's not your mission, et cetera. But if you do this speech, I'll do you a favor and I can give a speech at one of your events. And I said, that's okay, really. This is a freebie. It's a freebie. You don't have to worry about that. Now, if you all, that was the end of the speaking. If you all don't mind, I do a lot of public speaking. And I'm kind of bored hearing myself. So I like to listen to music while I give a talk. Is that okay? So, does this look familiar to you? Now, I grew up at a time when headphone had a different meaning. It was what you had to do to talk on the phone. You had to put your head next to the phone that was on the wall, and it wasn't going anywhere. So you had to put your head, that was headphone. But when the headphones first came in, they did us all a really big favor. What was the favor? They let us know explicitly that nobody was listening to you, right? Before, they weren't listening to you either. But you couldn't tell that by looking at them because they didn't have headphones. Now we have headphones. So what I find is, when I give a talk to a group like you, there are 1,300 headphones out there. There are 1,300 headphones. Cassie, get off that phone. Sound like a teacher, didn't I? There are 1,300 headphones on you out there. So why do I say that? I want to make a contract with you before I go into the substance. And that is that we have a problem in communication. We have a real problem in communication. One is, how do I get you to take off your headphones and stop listening to your playlist long enough to listen to my talk? Okay, so I'm going to take off my headphones. You take off your headphones. What does that mean? Well, how many of you are familiar with Jonathan Haidt's metaphor of the rider on the elephant? Anybody? So this is his description of our brain. Our conscious self is riding on top of an elephant that represents our subconscious, and we think we're in charge. We think the little guy on the top, that is our conscious brain, is telling that big old subconscious elephant what to do and where to go. That doesn't work. You know, even if you're on a trained horse, they'll do what you want as long as they want to do what you want. And when they want to do something else, you're just along for the ride. I've experienced that before. So the problem we all have is, how do we turn off that little voice in our head long enough to listen to somebody else? And the reason I say that is, you all know the little voice I'm talking about. It's been with you since you were a kid. And that little voice is your subconscious saying, I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't I wouldn't watch Fox News if I was you. I wouldn't read the New York Times if I was you. Because if you do, you might have to change your mind about something. And I am your mind and I'm not changing, right? So in order for you to put that little voice to sleep for the rest of the time, you have to first acknowledge that it's there. Now, all of you who are married will get it when I say that listening is really hard to do, right? So my wife and I, we've been married 30 years. We did a little marriage counseling, something called imago therapy, where the hardest part is your spouse has to say something meaningful to them, and you have to repeat it back word for word without editing it, not rolling your eyes, no criticism, no amendments. This is really fun to watch if you're not the person having to do it, right? So my wife goes first, and she says, and this is why listening is so hard, because that little voice immediately, and you're doing it right now, so stop it. That little voice wants to say, is this what the whole speech is going to be about? Is he really from Arkansas looking like that? I mean, what? Stop it. So what happens is, my wife says, I feel ignored when you come home from work and talk about your day before you ask about my day. And I have to say back to her, I understand that you feel ignored when I come home and talk about my day before I ask about your day, even though I had a meeting in the Oval Office. True story. But you can't do that. That's against the rules. And so I get to wait, and she does it, and then I get to wait, and I get to do my thing, and she can't, and she blows up, she turns red, but she has to repeat right back to me, I would really appreciate it if you would just leave me alone when I'm watching the Yankee game. This has never been true in 30 years, but I finally had the chance to make her repeat it out loud. Now, the thing about listening, though, is you have to be able to say the last thing word for word if you're really going to be listening, right? And that's really hard to do. Try it sometime in your relationship. You'll find it's really hard to do. So I want you to get that elephant out of the room by putting that little voice away. Let it go gamble for a while. It'll come back feeling much worse than when it left. And I want to talk, because my thing is this. To teach, you have to reach. And to reach, you have to be reached. Because in my opinion, it's all about empathy. It's all about empathy. So much of education's image in the world is smart person pushing things into young people's brains. And we know that's not how it works. We know that they pull it in when they want to pull it in. And for them to want to pull it in, they've got to know that you're listening to them. They have to know that you're sitting facing front and listening to them before they're going to sit face front and listen to you. And that's why I just want to give you two examples of what I mean. When I say to be reached, you have to reach, you have to be reached. So I was reached by two people in my youth that really made a difference in my life. I had a lot of great teachers, but neither of these were teachers in the traditional sense. My teachers academically had it easy because I liked school. I was, big reader, and I was like 5 years old while I had the glasses. But I had a little league coach, so I was born with a little birth defect that makes my right hand smaller than my left hand, and my right arm smaller than my left arm, so I'm not the first draft choice for most teams. And when I was this big, that was really true. But I loved baseball, and I loved playing basketball, but I really loved baseball. So when I was a little kid in Little League team, I had a coach who reached me by setting a goal that any kid could meet. Hustle. Whether you're the best player or the worst player, the best hitter, the worst hitter, if you hustle, if you work hard, if you run after everything, don't walk, if you don't talk back, you do everything hard, then you will be on the team and you'll play every game. And that gave me hope because I knew I would never be the best of anything on the team. So that coach was the one who first instilled in me a sense of self-esteem from doing something that I wasn't the best at, that I could still feel like I was good at, right? And you could see in every picture I took with the team, I'm sitting right next to the coach. Now, this was not a pushy, touchy-feely guy. He was a factory worker who made ambulances and was a pitcher on the semi-pro softball fast pitch team. And he was coaching Little League. He had no son in the field, no kid playing baseball. He just loved it, and he was terrific. So now I graduate, and I get into 7th grade, and things get serious. You know what I'm talking about. Middle school, all of a sudden, life gets real. And the coaches not only wouldn't let me play, they wouldn't let me practice. They wouldn't even let me practice. So I'm going home every single night in 7th grade, weeping from the injustice of it all, right? I was big on justice. And finally, the other person who really put me on my path, my dad, who wanted to be a doctor, but because of the Depression and the war ended up being a grocer his whole life, for which he never forgave himself. He said to me after one of my weeping sessions, "Son, God did not put you here to play basketball. He put you here because of your brain. Focus on that. Focus on why you're here, not what you can't do, but what you can do. And the people who won't even give you a chance, move on. Do what you're good at." Now, I'm going to come back to those two people later in my story, but to me, both of those were ways of reaching me. One of them said, "You're a success if you work hard." And the other one said, "Focus on what you know you're best at and don't worry about the other stuff." And those two things changed my life. So now I want to ask you to prove the point about trying to listen to me for the next 20 minutes or so. I want you to hand your phone to the person to the right of you for 28 minutes. Can you do that? Hand your phone, talking to you, Cassie, hand your phone to the person to the right of you. And they're going to keep it. They're not going to steal it. They're not going to look at it. They're not going to look at the text from your girlfriend or your wife. Can we do it? Can we do it? That doesn't require a lot of talking. Did you do it? Give yourself a hand. You're the second group to do it. The other were nurses. I did this to a group of people who are working with gene editing, who want to change all of us to not have any diseases, and not only change me, but change my kids through my, sperm and egg manipulation. And I said, hand your phones off to the people behind you. In that case, they refused to do it. They refused to do it. I said, let me get this straight. You don't trust the person behind you with your phone. And the person in front of you doesn't trust you. But you want all of us to trust you to take our genes and edit them. And what's up with that? So, thank you. Now, interestingly enough, my wife gave me a great little theme for this morning. How many of you know how to proof yeast? So when you proof yeast, you want to find out if the yeast is still working. So you heat some water and you sprinkle yeast on the water, and if it fizzes, you have proved that that yeast is still a live culture. There are so many analogies there, I don't need to list them for you, do I? The fertile mind has to be the warm water. You're the yeast. When you meet the warm water, you've got to sizzle to show that everything is working. And every piece of yeast that lives today can tie its history back to the first yeast. So can education, right? Everything we learn, we can tie back to generations before us. Everything we're teaching, we can tie to generations to come. So the whole idea of proving things involves a fertile ground, a big idea, interaction that builds energy, doesn't take it away, and ties things together, ties things back to where they came from and where they're going. So let me talk, as Ranjit said, we talk a lot about sharing data. Let me talk about data for just a minute, because it's a 4-letter word, and it's we don't really use it right. There's this continuum that you cannot get to the end of if you don't share the data, and this is what I mean. Data by itself is a meaningless jumble of stuff until you organize it in some context, and that's what we call information. It's the difference between going outside and knowing it's cold and knowing that it's 32 degrees and it's going to snow and this is February. That data is now information because you put it in context. Now, if you get enough contextual information to give you the ability to predict something, we call that knowledge. And when your knowledge can be generalized to things beyond what you're dealing with, we call that wisdom. How can you ever teach wisdom or share knowledge if very few people have access to the information that comes from raw data, right? Too often, we think of data as just this meaningful big blob of stuff that we bounce around like a beach ball at a football game, when in fact, data is the beginning of a process that leads to knowledge, that leads to wisdom, which is why we're in this to begin with, whether it's education or curing cancer. So how can you possibly get to wisdom if you're not constantly sharing data? So, you know, the problem with data in healthcare is huge. And let me talk, I'm going to do my speech backwards today. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing now, and I'm going to tell you why I'm doing it, how I got there, and then I'm going to go back how I got to that, because I want to end up back at those two people I mentioned, my dad and my coach. So the Biden Cancer Initiative, this is how don't we all have to define our jobs by what we tell our mother we do? Okay? So I tell my mother, who turned 95 last weekend and is healthier than I am, I told my mom, I'm trying to build the cancer research and care system that you think we already have. Right? How many times have you said to yourself, gosh, I'm trying to make this school thing what people think it is, when we all inside know it's not there yet? So just let me give you some examples. We assume that your doctor in Bemidji, Minnesota knows how they treat a rare form of cancer in New York City and can take care of it. Totally wrong. We assume you can get your medical records and you can learn from them and share them with people researching your kid's disease or your disease. Wrong. We assume that people who work on the same problem, same cancer, same lab, know what each other's doing and cooperate and collaborate and share stuff. Totally wrong. The joke is, if you want to know what somebody in a lab is doing, the last person to ask is the person next to them. Seriously. So we think that when somebody tries something new and it works, that everybody knows about it in a really fast period of time. Not true. We think that when we study thousands of people and we get their genes and we get their medical records and their outcomes, that we can put it all together and find patterns. Not true. So what do you do about it? Well, think about your medical records. Think about life first. Let's talk about life first. Everything you've done in your life has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Don't even get me started on 20 years, not to mention the last year. So everything you need is right here, right? Your photos from your family, you can invest, you can book a ticket, you can videotape and video Skype and all this stuff. You can do everything except check your health. You can do everything except look at your medical records. You can do everything except find a clinical trial near you with the right question to help you. You can't do any of that well here. And the reason is the medical data, your health data, lives and dies in the building it was created in. It never leaves the building. I was treated for leukemia in New York at Sloan Kettering, and all my digital records from my out treatment are online for my little blood test. But when I had to be in the hospital for 5 days, all of that is hidden from me. Hidden from me on purpose. So I can't even look at what they were all whispering about at the foot of the bed, right? I think about medical information the way I think about my crazy Uncle Tom. My crazy Uncle Tom started every sentence by going, whoop, whoop, how you doing today, Greg? I'm fine, Uncle Tom, how are you? Whoop, I'm fine. I'm not making this up. I told you I'm from Arkansas. Unfortunately, my uncle was in charge of my grandfather's rental properties, and my uncle, I guess it was good for my grandfather, was a first-class hoarder. First-class hoarder. If he saw a room like this, he would die and go to heaven if he hadn't already died and gone to heaven. And when I say first-class hoarder, I mean he was born, raised, and died in the same house, and that house was filled from the ground to the ceiling with stuff. Every surface, toilet, tub, oven, bed. I don't know if he slept standing up on the porch or what, but his house was bottom to top stuff. Now, when he died and we went through it, we found tons of stuff, and then we would find meaningful stuff, like the deeds to my grandfather's properties from Wago, my father's ticket home from London after World War II on the Queen Mary, my father's Colt 45 and a bag of bullets, where he dropped it in the house when he came home and nobody moved it for 70 years until my mother mailed it to me. The gun with the bullets, mailed it to me in the post office, mailed it to me, and it got to me. 2003, okay? So why do I bring that up? Well, there was a lot of interesting stuff in there, a lot of interesting stuff. But it was in a hoarder's house full of junk. Guess where your medical records are? They're in a hoarder's room at a hospital, buried under all kinds of irrelevant stuff. So when I say we have a problem, we really have a problem. So what is the Biden Cancer Initiative's attack on this? Well, brute force. We're convening people around the issue of data sharing, how to build a trust where people can deposit data that data scientists can use, because the other problem is the people who need to know about the data, scientists, are not data scientists. They're biologists. So you need data scientists, and they have very different culture, very different language, very different practices. So you have to find a way to get medical data into a database that's meaningful to a data science person. The other problem, and this is why I say the system you think we have, we don't even have agreement in cancer on standard language to describe anything. Think about that for a minute. You get a biopsy. Nobody trusts that pathology report outside that institution. Nobody. I asked 5 of the top cancer center directors, would you trust a pathology report from any of the other directors? And they said, I don't even trust them from my own institution. They don't have standard language to diagnose a cancer. They don't have standard language to describe a tumor. So how are we going to share data if we don't even have a common language, some sort of Esperanto where we can actually talk about it? So guess what? There are standards groups that do that, so we're working on that. But the bigger problem is this. It's not about how complicated the data is. It's not about how complicated sharing it is. In this world, think of the data you can get during baseball season. Well, this guy hit this pop-up at a launch angle of 73 degrees on a day it was 75 degrees. Isn't that a coincidence? I mean, you get more data about baseball than you do about your health. Think of the markets. Every moment you know what's going on all over the world in any kind of financial instrument. And yet we don't know right now how many people were diagnosed with cancer yesterday. And we don't know how many of them died yesterday, and we don't know how many of them got a treatment that started making them better. But we can tell you everything about the markets in Malaysia today, like 10 minutes ago. So we have a lot of problems. So our focus is on building these standards, and guess what? Forcing people to adhere to standards. It's called like railroad tracks, right? And your phone. If every phone company had its own standard for moving information around the internet, it'd be a total mess. But we have one protocol people use to communicate. Computers use standard software languages. There are several, but they use a standard, but not in health. So that is what we're doing at the Biden Cancer Initiative, along with dealing with disparities in access to care. In my hometown, you couldn't get cancer except for Tuesdays and Thursdays, because that's when the doctors came over from Memphis. If you stayed home, you lived a long life. So that hasn't changed in my lifetime. That's still the case. There are 2 determinants of who survives cancer. Number 1 is insurance. Number 2 is zip code. Zip code. So not even just race, it's zip code and race. So all kinds of poor people from any population group are going to have a harder time with cancer in certain zip codes. So why and how did we get into the Biden Cancer Initiative? And that's what I want to talk about the moonshot. So as you know, Joe Biden lost his son to brain cancer. And I want to tell you a story of 3 cancers. So I had a friend in New York, and she had 2 young kids, 40 years old, and she told me she had been diagnosed with glioblastoma. This is what killed Biden's son. And I knew exactly what was going to happen to her. She was going to live 18 months. I didn't tell her that. I helped her find some clinical trials. She had a pretty good quality of life. A month after that, I got diagnosed with chronic leukemia by a physical, by chance. I was getting off an airplane in San Francisco after having a physical 4 days earlier, and I hadn't heard from my doctor, and I'd had a few prostate scares before. So I thought, if I don't call now, it's Thursday, I'm landing in San Francisco. If I don't call right now, he'll be closed for the weekend. So I called my doctor. Remember that. I called my doctor. He said, "Oh, glad you called. Your PSA's good, your cholesterol's good, but by the way, you have leukemia." Now, I'm from Arkansas, but even in Arkansas, that's not how we use "by the way." By the way. Usually, by the way is like there's some lint on your jacket, not by the way, you have leukemia. And so he said, "You better get that checked." No shirt. So I did. I was visiting a doctor. I'm in the doctor business, and so I went to visit a doctor. I had worse leukemia than my doctor thought I did. But it turned out fine. I didn't need treatment for a year. And then when I did, everything went fine. And I finished treatment a month before my friend died of brain cancer. Yeah. Now, another friend of mine from Seattle I've known for over 30-something years. We were in an after-work band together. There was a time in my life when I was a rock and roll drummer, and I couldn't give it up, so I joined this after-work band in Seattle. My friend sold one of the very first voicemail systems for your computer, and when computers were used to do that a whole lot more in offices. Never had to work again, traveled the world, had 3 kids, wonderful wife, and then he got multiple myeloma 3 years ago, and they gave him 3 years to live. So he was wealthy enough to try everything. He funded a clinical trial that never got started before he died. In over a year, they couldn't get this trial started. He flew all the way across the country to be in a clinical trial, only to be told, "Oh, your last chemo was too soon. We can't," as if they couldn't have asked that question on the phone before this guy in pain with a bad back flew all the way from Seattle to New York. He gave Dana-Farber some of his tissue from his bone marrow biopsy, and then they decided to pause their trial for a while. Meanwhile, he's trying everything. And then he sent me an email and said, "The curves are crossing. What it takes to keep living versus what I'm going through is over. And in Washington State, you have a Death with Dignity Act." So he sent me a goodbye email, and he died a couple weeks ago. But here's what got me. In the notice on Caringbridge from his wife, she said, Bard did his own personal moonshot by letting the doctors experiment with him until the end of his life to help other people. Now, I knew he was going to die, and we'd had conversations about it. But when his wife said it was his own personal moonshot, I kind of lost it. Because what the moonshot represents to people is hope backed up by hard work. The moonshot started as a program to get the government to think differently, to get the private sector to think differently. And we had one, from my perspective, one central question that I asked the 20 government agencies standing there when I had my first meeting, which was a little daunting. I had been called out of the blue to go do this. I wasn't looking for this. And I go in, and I thought, what is the one question I can ask a group of bureaucrats from 20 agencies that could make a difference in cancer in 9 months? And this was the question. Where do you touch patients on their journey from prevention through detection, diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship? And how can you do a better job for more people? How can you do a faster job? How can you double your impact? I don't want to hear about budgets. I don't want to hear about 5-year plans. I want to know, I want you to actually have a conversation with your team. Where do we touch patients in their journey? Where do our programs actually leave the building, right? And then I said, and the next thing you have to do is pick somebody around the table you've never worked with before and work with them. So NASA started working with the National Cancer Institute. The Department of Energy and the VA built their own private data network to move information from the world's largest hospital, the VA, over to the world's fastest computers that go 1,000,000 billion computations a second. Sit on that for a minute. 1,000,000 billion computations a second. How's that possible? But that's what we need to do to analyze medical data when it's big enough. So as a result of all that, they came back with great ideas. The Patent Office doubled the rate of approval for cancer-related stuff. NCI and NASA started working on radiation treatments that are less harmful. A guy who was on the back of the room from the military hospital, Walter Reed, said, oh, by the way, now every time anybody says, by the way, I kind of jump. He says, by the way, we have blood samples for the last 25 years of soldiers that we test every 2 years for HIV/AIDS. I bet we could find out if some of those guys have and women have cancer now. And go back and look at their blood samples and see when we first could figure that out. That's a big idea. It's called liquid biopsy. And now there's a whole consortium of 20 groups, for-profit, nonprofit, government regulators, all trying to figure out what does it mean to find cancer in your blood early and when does it matter? Because we all have cancer cells all the time that get wiped out of our body. It's the ones that don't that get you. So how do you tell those from the other ones? And there were 80, literally 80 other examples of collaboration and innovation in the private sector, in nonprofits, in kids starting foundations, all around the notion that we can double our rate of progress in cancer by working together and by sharing data. So we had a summit like this, except we only had 400 people, but around the country, we had 7,000 people who organized 270 simultaneous workshops in every state of the Union, and Puerto Rico and Guam, which, as you know, are American territories. And so at that moment, we went, this is no longer a government program, this is a movement. People want to be involved, and they do want to be involved. I get emails every day. My wife died of cancer, my sister died of cancer, my kid died of cancer, can I come help you? Every day. People care. And the moonshot focused that. As we tell people, the moon has no light. The moon only reflects light. And the moonshot, cancer moonshot, was the exact same thing. We didn't have the ability to light up everybody. They lit up themselves. And we just reflected that light back out to the communities that care about cancer and cancer patients. And that is a critical thing to do, to reflect the light of people like you who light up a room with what you're trying to do and make sure we reflect it and share it out into the world. Now, the moonshot had, as I said, had only 9 months. And those 80 collaborations got started, but we wanted to make sure they kept going, so we still track them. We still do all of that. And the Cancer Moonshot did something else, which is very rare. It brought Democrats and Republicans together around a common idea, accelerating the way we deal with cancer. Now, granted, there are some people who think you can help people with cancer and not care about whether they have insurance. That doesn't work. People who don't have insurance will die from cancer that can be treated and cured. It's just a fact. But the other thing is they all came together to fund the program, to fund it long term, to do new stuff, and to start requiring people to share data in journals, and the journals to share the data outside of paywalls. So all of this cancer moonshottiness, as we used to call it in our office, if somebody said, we want you to work with us, we would say, well, we have to see if it's moonshotty, by which we meant it can't be something you're already doing, it can't be small, it has to be big, it has to be real, it has to be collaborative, and it has to make an impact. If that's what you're doing, we'll help you find partners, we'll help elevate you in talks, we'll meet with you, and that's what we do with the Biden Cancer Initiative. Now, if you back up from before the moonshot, I had been working in this area around the issue of culture because when I asked a group of people from a dozen different diseases in 2003, when I started a group called Faster Cures, I asked them, what is really your problem? Why is it, what's holding up autism? What's holding up lupus? What's holding up ALS? And after 3 days, they all had the same answer, 42. No, they all had the same answer, which was, as a cultural reference to the potheads in the crowd, and the answer was culture. It wasn't money, it wasn't science, it wasn't technology, it was culture. The culture of research, the culture of philanthropy, the culture of Wall Street, the culture of academia, the culture of patients who are impatient. Everybody had a cultural problem. So guess what? In the moonshot, we're talking about changing the culture of research. Why does that matter? So I'm a really bad cellist, but I play cello, and I met Yo-Yo Ma many years ago, and we became friends. And he told me something that's really important. He said, Greg, everybody thinks practice makes perfect. It does not. Practice makes permanent. Only perfect practice makes perfect. And I know this firsthand because all of us, when we're faced with something easy and something hard, focus on the easy. So if I'm playing a cello piece with a hard part, I play the whole piece through 10 times. That's not perfect practice. I'm not giving the hard part any more attention than I am the easy part. It's like I tell people studying for the bar in the summertime. Enjoy the summer. Go to class. If they say something you don't know, write it down. Don't read everything that you already know. Don't take notes on what you already know. Focus on what you don't know, and you'll have a much better time of it. But if you study everything all the time, you're not giving the proper attention to the hard part. Well, guess what? Practice in health and practice in education are not perfect by a long shot, but they are permanent because that's how you were trained, that's how your trainer was trained, that's how your research lab head was trained, all the way back to people who lived before phones. And yet we're letting them tell us how to do things in the 21st century. That little voice in your head started in the 1900s. It just didn't start when you were born. This is the way it has to be. Your teacher told you you have to do it this way. Well, your teacher didn't have instant communication, instant computing, instant social media, and kids who see the whole world all the time. My kids went to a Waldorf school where you try not to wake them up too early about sex, about violence, about media. Let them be kids. We're way past that now, sadly. So I'm always asking cancer researchers, can you look at your practice and see if it's permanent or perfect? Because I'm pretty sure it's permanent, but it's not perfect because you haven't challenged yourself on how to change your practice. So here's the problem all of us have who are trying to do what you're doing and what I'm doing. We know the right thing to do. We know we need to share the data. The problem with I mentioned hoarding. In medicine, sharing data now is like insider trading. I know something you don't know. It's valuable. I'll tell you if you tell me, but we're not going to tell all these other people. Bad idea. The other thing is people create data and they have a monogamous relationship with that data. Nobody else can date their data. It should not be a monogamous relationship. Now, all the men in the crowd just woke up. He said, I don't have to have a monogamous relationship? No, go back to sleep. What I'm talking about is we need data to be promiscuous. It needs to go everywhere, talk to everybody. People challenge it, say, girl, do you think you look good in that? You know, I mean, people have to have other opinions, and if you don't, you waste a lot of time and money and you fail. You fail at the end of the day. It's not easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't be here. God knows if it were easy to do what you do, you wouldn't be here. You'd be fat and happy somewhere. You know how hard this is to reach and to be reached. So here are two last points I want to make. Number one, I was asked when I went into the White House, why would anybody take a job that's only 9 months? And I said, well, first, stop talking to my wife. And then I said, well, let's think about that a minute. First, 9 months is a long time. You know that. 9 months is a lifetime for a 7th grader. It's a lifetime. 9 months was half of a lifetime for my friend Alex, right? She had 18 months. 9 months was half of her life after that conversation. So yes, 9 months is not enough time to finish anything except a baby. That's a pretty big exception, by the way. But it's also plenty of time to start something meaningful, impactful, dramatic, disruptive. 9 months is plenty of time to do that. You know this in your classrooms. I know this from what I saw people do and volunteer to do and change their lives to do in 9 months in the White House. I saw them do that. But there's something else that I want to end on. RANJIT has been trying to educate me about this speech for 6 months. I don't do 6 months. I told him last week, okay, what's this all about? And so, not that we hadn't had 5 conversations, mind you, I just didn't pay any attention. Because I only have so much RAM in here, and, you know, I have to, like, who's going to win the Super Bowl? What are the Yankees lineup going to be? You know, important stuff. And he kept saying, you got to nail this speech. I said, RANJIT, relax, it's 6 months away. Well, now it's not. Uh-oh. So he sent me some materials, and one of the things in the materials said that you worry that some of the small successes you have don't lead to big changes. That was one of the things he mentioned from surveying you, that some of you worry that the small victories don't add up. Well, let me tell you about small victories. My coach, as I said, gave me the self-esteem to take on stuff I never thought I could do. And even though I mentioned I have a different hand than most people, I was a professional drummer. I'm a pretty good cellist when I practice. I just played a concert for my mom's 95th birthday on Sunday. So he launched me into a lifelong period of confidence, not to worry, but to take things on and try hard. And then my dad, as I mentioned, had focused me to do what I was put here to do, which is to use my brain, hopefully in the service of humankind, because I'm that way. In the video, when Miguel says we came into the classroom not knowing each other and we left as a family, that's my idea of the American dream. My grandparents were Syrian refugees who were attacked, some of them killed, in Georgia in World War I, and we're doing it today. We come to this country not knowing each other. We're supposed to leave as a family. So my dad had suffered through his father's violence against his father in his childhood, and he made sure that I had confidence to do whatever I wanted to do because he never had the chance. He never had the chance to do what he wanted to do. So people say, did your dad like you being a rock and roll drummer after college? He loved it. His only complaint was the drums are in the back, not the front. Right? He said, son, you need to move the drums to the front. And I said, well, you know, I'm not Phil Spector or whatever his name was, Phil Collins. But here's the thing. In 2001, after I'd been in the White House I'd been in government 12 years, including the White House for Gore, and I'd done a lot of meaningful things in my life. My dad died of cancer at 91. This happens. I go to the funeral home, and in the next room, in the casket, was my coach. Same day. My dad in one room, my coach in the other room. And next to my coach his casket was a photograph of my Little League team with me like this. Think about that, what that meant to me, that it meant to him something, and his family. So in that one day, I lost my 2 leading lights. A small thing to inspire a guy in Blytheville, Arkansas. But I've been able to touch you, I hope today. I've been able to touch thousands of people who count on us to help them with cancer, telecommunications, people needing to communicate for health reasons, for jobs, for homelessness. All because 2 people in a little bitty town gave me some good advice and put some confidence in me. So yes, your small victories are the only victories that count. They're the only ones that do add up. Please don't stop. Don't get discouraged. Share your successes with each other so that you know how many small successes you have. And I think, like me, you'll be overwhelmed. Thank you so much. Oh, shucks. Thank you, thank you. You're too kind. Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
I know we're a little late. I just want to say reiterate 2 things Greg said. And one is light up this morning in these workshops around the Prove. You've got a lot to share that needs to be reflected within the community. And when he said that the cancer moonshot is hope combined with hard work, I thought I'm stealing that because that is exactly what Gear Up is. Hope combined with a lot of hard work. Now, I also want to tell Greg, because he made a joke about it in the beginning, that was the best speech during this event. No one is going to remember anybody else but you. Give it up for Greg Simon. Thank you.
Thank you.